Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station.
Wilhuff Tarkin, now Grand Moff Tarkin, looked out at his creation and found it good. He was building a world, the culmination of his vision. It would hold countless worlds under his thrall.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
No star system will dare oppose the Emperor now.
The Rebel Alliance is too well equipped. They're more dangerous than you realize.
Dangerous to your Starfleet, Commander, not to this battle station.
The more you tighten your grip up, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
Not after we demonstrate the power of this station.
The Tarkin Doctrine first came into the lore with the Imperial sourcebook. Since then, it has been a fundamental aspect of the Empire, cementing its imposing nature around the idea of a rule by fear.
Once the station was fully online, then the Tarkin Doctrine, officially recognized by the Empire and named as such, would hold sway throughout the known worlds. The Tarkin Doctrine was as simple as it was effective. Fear would keep the galaxy in line. Once the power of this Death Star had been demonstrated, its very existence would be enough to maintain peace. The Rebel Alliance wouldn't dare risk facing it. An insurgent who would gladly accept his own death in the cause would quail at the thought of his entire homeworld being turned to incandescent plasma.
However, in the years since, people largely deride it as a poor idea by simply remembering what the end result was instead of what it was meant to do. To end this misconception, we will be taking a look at the origins of the Tarkin Doctrine, its effects on the political and military aspects of the Empire, and the man himself.
Imperial Communique number 001044.92V. This is the secret communique that began the policies adopted by the Empire and was later called the Tarkin Doctrine. While the official stance of the Empire presents itself as an enforcer of law and order, unofficially the doctrine of fear held sway. Even though the realization of this doctrine and the Death Star has been destroyed, the policies are still in effect and are being modified in the wake of the rebellion's apparent victory. To His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Palpatine, from Governor Tarkin, Oversector, Eriadu, regarding increasing the security of the Empire.
Chronologically, this message was dictated within the early years of the Empire, as the Clone Wars were wrapping up and the Outer Rim was still engulfed in the cleanup conflicts of the reconquest of the Rim. During this period, the New Order was still new, still operating under the systems of the Old Republic. The military governors appointed by Palpatine, while still acting with full authority, still had to operate within the confines of their commands and the continued influence of the Imperial Senate. As a result of this issue of authority, and the threats plaguing the Empire at the time, Moff Tarkin thought to offer up a solution, which would go on to set the course of history.
Your Majesty, it has recently come to my attention that what had previously been the quiet grumbling of malcontents on backwater worlds has become dissidents in more civilized systems. Your Majesty will forgive me if I am repeating foundless rumors, but I have heard there is even armed defiance in some sectors. Coupled with increased resistance to your plans from hot-headed young senators, this has given me pause to think about our security arrangements. I myself have been frustrated chasing pirate bands in my sector, only to have them leap deep into another sector where my forces cannot follow without running into conflict with another Moff and the advisor who supports him. If the scattered armed resistance should become organized, they will doubtless learn from the example of other criminal brethren. Granting any rebels the advantage of elusiveness is foolhardy. I have also noticed that even the excellent pace with which your Majesty is strengthening his fleets can scarcely provide security for the Empire should a significant number of planets begin to defy your will. We are many years away from a force vast enough to secure every system simultaneously.
Even with the shutdown of the droid armies, the holdouts of the Separatist movement still had enough force and will to continue to engage with the nascent Empire. The first 3 years of its rule was spent in securing former Separatist worlds, hunting down surviving military elements, putting down continued insurrections, and combating roving bands of former Separatist forces which had turned to pirate tactics with the collapse of the organized movement. The threat of piracy in the outlying systems would continue to push the militarization of the Empire, which even under the Old Republic had been a haven for dissidents and terrorists.
From the Rotunda's tall pulpit, Supreme Chancellor Valorum was saying,
"The crisis unfolding in the Yinchor system offers further proof that in our determination to maintain an era of prosperity in the core, we have allowed the outer systems to become lawless realms, with pirates, slavers, smugglers, and arms merchants operating with impunity. Proscribed materiel and technologies find their way to species whose appeals for Republic aid have gone unanswered, and the outcome is antagonism and intersystem conflict. Brought together by mutual need, alliances of forgotten worlds turn to the galactic cartels to furnish what we have denied them: growth, protection, and security, along with weapons and combat training."
He gestured broadly to near and distant senatorial platforms.
"While we sit in cool comfort, a confederacy of the disenfranchised expands in the Outer Rim."
Within these same crises of the late Republic, a young Wilhuff Tarkin would enter the fray, son of the influential Tarkin family, raised in a tradition of militarism, order, and stability. He would serve as an officer in the Outland Region's security force, formed by his cousin, Ranulph Tarkin, then rose to prominence as Lieutenant Governor of his homeworld of Iriadu.
"Supreme Chancellor Valorum," the man who had made it all happen said, "Iriadu is honored to receive you." Lieutenant Governor Tarkin was a wiry man, with intense blue eyes, sunken cheeks, and an expressionless mouth. His brow was high and bony, and his taut face seemed to reveal the size and shape of every bone beneath. Already receding at the temples, his black hair was combed straight back and meticulously cut. He stood tall and straight as a military officer and projected an air of aristocratic officiousness. Valorum recalled hearing that Tarkin, in fact, had served in the military when Iriadu was part of what had then been known as the Outland regions. "Did Senator Palpatine arrive with you?" Tarkin asked. "He had some lingering business to attend to on Coruscant," Valorum replied. "But I am certain that the Naboo delegation will arrive in time for the summit's opening remarks." Tarkin appraised Valorum openly as they stepped down into the ballroom, the crowd parting before them. "It's a rare occasion when anyone involved in Republic politics leaves Coruscant," Tarkin continued. "Something of a prison, isn't it? Should duty ever call for me to be confined to one place, I will at least demand that I have ample space around me." He waved his thin arms through a broad circle. Valorum forced a smile. "The trip was short and pleasant." "Yes, but for you to leave the Corps and to come here, it's nothing less than extraordinary." "Nothing less than necessary," Valorum said. Tarkin arched a brow as he turned slightly. "Necessary, perhaps, but certainly unprecedented. And I believe it speaks strongly of your desire to do what is best and right for the outlying systems."
Tarkin had seen the lawlessness of the Outer Rim for years. His service with the ORSF, as well as Lieutenant Governor, would see him not only in the thick of the problems during the waning years of the Republic, but also ruminating on potential solutions.
"Will you now consent to our accompanying you?" Tyne asked. "No," Valorum said flatly. "Appearances must be maintained." Adi looked hard at him. "Then will you at least agree to keeping your vehicle's force field enabled?" "I absolutely insist on it," Tarkin interjected. "It is Eriadu's obligation to assure that no harm comes to you." With obvious reluctance, Valorum nodded. "Until we've reached the grounds of the summit hall." His face blushed with sudden anger. Tarkin swung to a group of Eriadu's security guards who were standing behind him. "See to it that the streets are cleared. Arrest anyone you have cause to suspect. Don't concern yourself with legalities. Take whatever steps are necessary."
The centerpiece of the Tarkin Doctrine would come to him in this period. Leaving the lieutenant governorship to take a senior command in the ORSF, he would once again meet up with an old acquaintance, the engineer and magnate, Wraith Sinar.
"The opportunities are endless," Wraith Sinar said as he walked along the factory parapet. Beside him strolled Commander Tarkin of the Republic Outland Region Security Force. They might have been brothers. Both were in their early 30s. Both were thin and wiry, with high-arching bony brows, piercing blue eyes, aristocratic faces, and attitudes to match. And both wore robes of senatorial favor, showing extraordinary service to the Senate over the past decade. "You're speaking of the Republic?" Tarkin asked, with more than a hint of disdain. His training, he came from an old and well-established military family, gave his voice a particular edge, both world-weary and amused. Tarkin could not take his eyes off the slowly rotating sphere with its massive core-powered turbo-laser now revealed. "Ah," he smiled, "always a weapon. Have you shown this to anybody?" Sinar shook his head sadly. He could see the enticement was working. The Trade Federation knows precisely what it needs and shows no interest in anything else. A deplorable lack of imagination. "Explain it to me." "It's a dream, but an achievable dream, given certain advances in hypermatter technology. An implosion core with a plasma about 1 kilometer in diameter could power an artificial construct the size of a small moon. A couple of large ice asteroids for fuel, common enough still in the outer fringe systems. A small crew could police an entire system with one vessel," Tarkin mused. "Well, not so small a crew, but one vessel, certainly." Sinar walked around the display and made large, vaguely designing sweeps of his hands. "I'm considering removing the extraneous spheres, sticking with one large ball 90 or 100 kilometers in diameter. A more wieldy design for transport." Tarkin smiled proudly. "I knew I picked the right man for this job, Wraith." He admired the design with brows tightly knit. "What a sense of scale! What unutterable power!" "I'm not sure I have any free time," Sinar said with a frown. "Despite my lack of connections, I still manage to keep very busy." Tarkin waved his hand dismissively. "Forget these shadows of a past life and focus on the future. What a future it will be, Wraith, if you satisfy the right people."
The concept of the Banal Planetoid is one that would shape the idea in his mind of an unassailable symbol. He would go on to claim it as his own and would work to shape it to his own designs. In the end, it resulted in something more than what Sinar had envisioned, into something purely Tarkin's.
Inspired by what he calls a great example, Tarkin redeems himself before the Supreme Chancellor with secret plans for a moon-sized battle station. Tarkin claims sole credit for the design. Sinar does not dispute him. It is a brainchild he is eager to disown. Sinar has a bad feeling about such an expensive concentration of might. The new order will find both Tarkin and Sinar useful.
Eventually rising to the governorship of Eriadu, he would continue to see his star rise in tandem with Palpatine's. Eventually his successes during the Clone Wars and the right politics would catapult him into prominence within Palpatine's new order.
No sooner had Dooku left the office than Sidious was donning his cloak and hurrying off to his next appointment. Hailing a skycab in Senate Plaza, he instructed the Grand Driver to deliver him to Tannic Spaceport. Relaxing back into the padded seat, he exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. In the space of a standard year, he had gone from leading 2 lives to managing almost half a dozen. Apprentice to Plagueis, master to Maul, distinguished senator, ally of Supreme Chancellor Valorum, and leader of a growing cabal of conspirators that included Pestige, Doriana, Grijatus in line to replace him in the Senate, the Force-sensitive human Sim Alu, intelligence analyst Armand Isard, Eriadu Senator Wilhuff Tarkin, and Umbaran telepath Sly Moore, whom he had made his covert aide. And leading a double life of his own, Dooku.
By the founding of the Galactic Empire, Tarkin was an active figure in galactic politics. During the Clone Wars, he was military governor overseeing the war effort of the Greater Seswena. This was an appointment made by Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, using emergency powers in tandem with the Reflex Amendment, to appoint several military governors throughout the conflict to coordinate the war effort. This resulted near the end of the Clone Wars with Palpatine passing the Sector Governance Decree.
Bail, what's happened? Bail's elegantly thin goatee pulled downward around his mouth. Have you seen this morning's decree? The Sector Governance Decree? Yes, I have. It's time, Mon, he said grimly. It's time to stop talking and start doing. We have to bring in the Senate.
Put in command of the 20 Sector armies, under 20 Moffs. A historic title used during the early years of the Republic, the revival of the Moff was welcomed as a check against Senate corruption.
I am no happier than the rest of you about this, Padme said, gesturing at the flimsiplast of the Sector Governance Decree on Bail Organa's desk. But I've known Palpatine for years. He was my most trusted advisor. I'm not prepared to believe his intent is to dismantle the Senate. Why should he bother? Mon Mothma countered. As a practical matter, as of this morning, the Senate no longer exists. Padme looked from one grim face to another. Gideon Danu nodded his agreement. Ter Tanil kept her eyes down, pretending to be adjusting her robes. Fang Zar ran a hand over his unruly gray-streaked topknot. Bail leaned forward. His eyes were hard as chips of stone. Palpatine no longer has to worry about controlling the Senate. By placing his lackeys as governors over every planet in the Republic, he controls our systems directly. He folded his hands and squeezed them together until his knuckles hurt. He's become a dictator. We made him a dictator.
The Moffs in charge of these first Oversectors were responsible for overseeing and coordinating the war effort as it moved into an all-out offensive following the Battle of Coruscant. This, of course, had the added benefit of securing Palpatine's personal control over these militaries and establishing a parallel governing body to the Senate.
This petition has been signed by 2,000 senators, Chancellor. We ask only that you instruct your governors not to interfere with the legitimate business of the Senate, and that you open peace talks with the Separatists. We seek only to end the war and bring peace and stability back to our homeworlds. Surely you can understand this. I understand a great many things, Palpatine said. This system of governors you have created is very troubling. It seems that you are imposing military controls even on loyalist systems. Your reservations are noted, Senator Amidala. I assure you that the Republic governors are intended only to make your systems safer by coordinating planetary defense forces and ensuring that neighboring systems mesh into cooperative units, and bringing production facilities up to speed in service to the war effort. That's all. They will in no way compete with the duties and prerogatives, with the power of the Senate. Something in the odd emphasis he put on the word power made Anakin think Palpatine was speaking more for Anakin's benefit than for Padme's. All those who gain power are afraid to lose it. May I take it then, Padme said, that there will be no further amendments to the Constitution? My dear Senator, what has the Constitution to do with this? I thought we were discussing ending the war. Once the Separatists have been defeated, Then we can start talking about the Constitution again. Must I remind you that the extraordinary powers granted to my office by the Senate are only in force for the duration of the emergency. Once the war ends, they expire automatically. And your governors? Will they expire too? They are not my governors, my lady. They are the Republic's. Palpatine replied imperturbably. The fate of their positions will be in the hands of the Senate, where it belongs. Padme did not seem reassured. And peace talks? Will you offer a ceasefire? Have you even tried a diplomatic resolution to the war? You must trust me to do the right thing, he said. That is, after all, why I am here. Fang Zar roused himself. But surely, I have said I will do what is right, Palpatine said, a testy edge sharpening his voice. He rose, drawing himself up to his full height, then inclining his head with an air of finality. And that should be enough for your committee.
This organization saw Tarkin made Moff of the 18th Sector Army. Throughout the war, he worked as governor to coordinate the Republic war effort in the region to great effect. His promotion saw his prestige rise as one of the very first Moffs. In this role, he would oversee the managing of the Death Star's early construction and coordinating campaigns within his region of control. This period also put him into first contact with the Dark Lord, Darth Vader.
On entering, Vader found his host sitting behind a gleaming slab of desk, plainly debating whether to remain seated or to stand, whether to place himself on equal footing with Vader, or, by appearance, to continue to suggest superiority. And then he stood, a slender, sharp-featured man, coming around from behind the desk with his hands clasped behind his back. "Thank you for detouring from your course," Wilhuff Tarkin said.
The Emperor requested it.
Tarkin pursed his thin lips. I suppose we can attribute that to the Emperor's astute ability to bring like-minded beings together.
Or pit them against one another.
Tarkin adopted a more sober look. That too, Lord Vader. With a mind as sharp as his cheekbones, Tarkin had risen quickly through the ranks of Palpatine's newly formed staff of political and military elite, among whom naked ambition was highly prized. So much so that a new honorific had been created for Tarkin and ambitious men like him. Moff. Tarkin perched himself on the edge of his desk and smiled thinly. Perhaps between the two of us, we can determine the reason the Emperor arranged this rendezvous. Vader crossed his gloved hands in front of him.
I suspect that you know more about the purpose of this meeting than I do, Moff Tarkin.
Tarkin's smile disappeared, and in its place came a look of sharp attentiveness. Surely you can guess, my friend.
Kashyyyk.
Bravo. Tarkin activated a holoplate that sat atop his desk. In the cone of blue light that rose from it, a bruised transport of military design could be seen moving through a cordon of Imperial corvettes. This was recorded approximately 10 hours ago, local, at the Kashyyyk system checkpoint. As you may have already guessed, the transport belongs to the Jedi. It appears to be a civilian model, but it isn't. It was hijacked on Delalt some weeks ago, and was the object of a pursuit that ended in the destruction of several Imperial starfighters. We have, however, been successful at tracking its movements ever since.
You've been tracking them?
Vader said in genuine surprise.
Was the Emperor apprised of this?
Tarkin smiled again. Lord Vader, the Emperor is apprised of everything. But his apprentice isn't, Vader thought. I ordered our checkpoint personnel to ignore the obvious fact that the transport signature has been altered, Tarkin continued, and to ignore as well the fact that whatever codes the transport furnished were likely to be counterfeit.
Why weren't the Jedi simply taken into custody at the checkpoint?
We had our reasons, Lord Vader. Or perhaps I should say that the Emperor had his.
They are on Kashyyyk now?
Tarkin stopped the holo image and nodded. We thought they might be refused entry. Apparently, however, someone aboard the ship is familiar with Kashyyik's trading protocols. Vader considered it for a moment.
You said that you had your reasons for clearing the transport through the checkpoint.
Yes, I'm coming to that, Tarkin said, standing to his full height and beginning to pace in front of the desk. I realize that you, of all people, require no assistance in bringing the fugitive Jedi to justice. But I want to lay out a somewhat broader plan for your consideration. Should you accept the proposition, I'm in a position to provide you with whatever ships, personnel, and materiel you think necessary.
What is the proposition, Moff Tarkin?
Tarkin came to a stop and turned fully to Vader. Simply this. The Jedi are your priority, as they should be. Certainly the Empire can't permit potential insurgents to run around loose, but... He raised a bony forefinger. My plan allows for the Empire to profit even more substantially from your undertaking. Reactivating the holoprojector, Tarkin turned his attention to an image of the Emperor's moonlit Psi secret project, orbitally anchored at its deep space retreat. Vader had learned that the Emperor had placed Tarkin in charge of supervising certain aspects of construction. Clearly, though, Tarkin was angling for more.
How does my hunt for a few rogue Jedi figure into your scheme regarding the Emperor's weapon?
Vader asked. My scheme, Tarkin said with a short laugh. All right, then. Here's the truth of it. The project is already far behind schedule. It has been beset with engineering problems, delays in shipments, the unreliability of contractors, and, most important, a shortage of skilled laborers. He stared at Vader. You must understand, Lord Vader, I wish nothing more than to please the Emperor. This is Sidious's real power, Vader thought. The ability to make others wish nothing more than to please him.
I accept that at face value,
he said at last. Tarkin studied him. You would be willing to help me achieve this goal?
I see a possibility.
Narrowing his eyes, Tarkin nodded in a way that came close to being a bow of respect. Then, my friend, our real partnership is just beginning.
Already blighted by politics and war, influential within Palpatine's circle, and a prominent figure in the Outer Rim and the military, Tarkin's scholarship would begin to take root within the New Order. First, the Imperial organizations of the ISB and Comp Force, his work, The Visions of the New Order, would be his first foray into outlining the ideas he'd been collecting for years. After this, he would put pen to flimsy and dictate a particular communique to the Emperor, outlining his concept to further streamline the Empire and address the flaws he saw as needing rectifying.
To provide a swift, systematic response to rebellion as it appears, rather than waiting until it is entrenched, I suggest the formation of oversectors, sectors consisting of systems in which rebellion is newly born, or systems which maintain frequent contact with systems in chronic unrest. These oversectors would be formed without regard for the boundaries of standard sectors. The forces of an oversector would be able to respond to threats quickly, while the threats are small. Liquidating a dozen small threats is easier than rooting out one well-established center of defiance. As an oversector is created only from problem worlds, they should be given a greater quantity of forces than an ordinary sector. I would think that 3 sector groups should be the average.
The reorganization of the Oversector is the Tarkin Doctrine's first major contribution to the New Order. A fundamental aspect of the control of the Grand Moffs is these large territories under their jurisdiction, the Oversector and the Priority Sector. In the modern Imperial Navy order of battle, the Oversector is the regional area encompassing multiple sectors. They would be allotted on average with 3 sector groups. A normal sector group on average consists of 2,400 ships with 24 Star Destroyers. 3 sector groups would total on average a total of 7,200 ships, with at least 72 Imperial Star Destroyers. At this scale, Tarkin creates a rapid response force able to cross between sectors and able to put down trouble spots as they arise. Such a force would easily be able to overwhelm any threat in multiple systems.
Give the command of an Oversector to a single individual who reports directly to you. This will bypass any delays created by political opportunism in your advisors.
The Grand Moffs aren't appointed to their sectors by Imperial advisors, who oversee the day-to-day functions of their own mandated territories, are appointed by and report directly to Palpatine. While the Moffs are still limited by the constraints of their own sector boundaries, Grand Moffs can easily manage the affairs of many sectors within their Oversector. At the very least, a Grand Moff can operate with at least 2 sector groups depending on their appointed priority sectors, with more resources being given depending on importance and influence. As a result of this communique, the Death Star project was initially given an allotment of 4 sector groups to its use. Additionally, Moffs were given a squadron to act as their personal command. Grand Moffs such as Tarkin were influential enough to have received 15 additional squadrons, potentially forming a full fleet entirely under their personal command. This gifting of resources would make Oversectors and priority sectors much more favored. The Moffs would continually argue that Grand Moffs were receiving material that they desperately needed more to maintain control. But as a result, these forces are made to step in and deal with the threats the Moffs themselves couldn't handle within their sectors. This treatise was originally penned with the intention of establishing these priority sectors to coordinate efforts in areas with active campaigns or in areas with special projects, allowing the Empire to react quickly to deal with problems before they could spread.
The Rebel Alliance is too well equipped. They're more dangerous than you realize.
Dangerous to your Starfleet, Commander, not to this battle station.
This is in direct contrast to the Imperial advisors, who for the Moffs act as their filter between them and the Emperor. Even with hundreds of advisors, Palpatine's inner circle rarely involved more than a few key players at a time. Having to contend with so many political matters makes Imperial advisors unable to respond to anything but the largest crises in a timely manner. This inefficiency is by design. The bureaucracy is slow to change, cementing Imperial rule, and making important changes something that can only be done by the Emperor's decree.
Cannibalize existing HoloNet transceivers, modify them for use, and put them in the flagship of every sector group in an Oversector command. Place similar facilities within His Majesty's command ship and within Imperial City. This will enable your forces to respond to threats in minutes rather than hours or days after the fact. Imperial forces will be able to coordinate to a degree impossible among an enemy whose fastest means of communication is a rendezvous at a common system.
Control of information is key for any government in a crisis. The Republic had a long tradition of free flow of information. Control of the HoloNet was key both during the war and in the new Empire. Being a real-time galactic communication network, it was as valuable as it was expensive to maintain. Being used by the government and large corporations made it extremely valuable to control. As a result, when Palpatine took the throne, he all but abolished it, forcing systems to pay for its large-scale dismantling, and as a result of cutting down, gained a lot of credits in the process. Just by this act, Palpatine gained enough credits that the Empire was able, in just 6 months, to man and outfit more troops than the Republic had done the entire war, and likely more than it had in other periods as well.
And as my first act with this new authority, I will create a grand army of the Republic to counter the increasing threats of the Separatists.
But the HoloNet didn't stay down. Shortly after this action, Tarkin urged Palpatine to restart the HoloNet on a smaller scale, for use by the Imperial Navy at the sector group level. By doing so, this gave that fast communication to the Imperial military and its officials, helping to lay the groundwork for the sector group and Oversector to have an ability to coordinate and react quickly to a crisis. What this resulted in was the reforming of the Imperial military around 2 fundamental aspects: an economy of force and fear of that force.
You worry too much, Lord Vader. The only thing that the rebels will learn is that they have no hope against the might of the Death Star.
An economy of force, in this context, means to essentially allocate the right amount of forces to a region where one can best maximize fighting power for decisive engagements. Hence why the Empire might have a low-risk area patrolled by a single cruiser, while a high-value shipyard will be protected by several capital ships. The Empire likewise maintains a highly militarized and well-educated fighting force to reflect this preparedness. Numbers of untrained rebel conscripts with bad morale fight worse than a Navy trooper company who spends their off time training at the ship's target range. The Empire is by its very nature too wide and expansive to be everywhere at once, so this allows it to be where it needs to and maximizes the number of forces it can use to deal with a threat.
Signal the fleet to move toward... What's this? Prepare to engage. It appears the Geonosians have allied themselves with the rebellion. Send for reinforcements. This treachery needs to be dealt with immediately.
As a result of this mentality, the Empire is striving for the best logistical outcome. Everything is standardized for efficiency, and crews are drilled for precision, loyalty, and total obedience to the end. As a result, its enemies have a hard time facing forces that not only outnumber them, but can easily find replacements for any losses to maintain the preferred fighting style of war. In order to accomplish this, the Imperial military strives for uniformity as it grows. Until its fragmentation, the Empire was still growing. New shipyards were being built, new factories producing better war gear, and more ships and troops were being sent out to police the Empire. In order to bring the maximum amount of force to its foes, the Empire needed to be everywhere it could. Which brings us to the final point.
Rule through the fear of force, rather than force itself. If we use our strength wisely, we shall cow thousands of worlds which might otherwise consider rebellion to some degree. We can do this through superior coordination and manipulation of information. For example, Oversector groups could coordinate to make a series of devastating attacks upon known planets of resistance, taking care to eliminate any fleeing vessels capable of making hyperspace. The operation would take several days in order to jump to all suspect planets in the area of operation. After the operation, we could report to the media that a single Oversector group conducted a single-day operation without specifying the day, which was successful, eliminating resistance on each of the worlds included in the operation. Granting the citizens the impression of an overwhelming force, one against which resistance would be futile, would certainly reduce the chance of a citizen fostering such resistance.
This highlights the general idea of the Tarkin Doctrine, fear of force, but not entirely in the common depiction thought of by most people. This is about control of information, the perception of power, and projecting strength as well as just pure strength.
There is very little this informant could do to lessen the might of the Empire. The subjugation of the Geonosians will surely send a clear message to all those who would consider opposing us. The rebellion won't be so bold again.
The Imperial military, while large, was still growing and would continue to do so. With this method, Tarkin hoped to use what force it had in order to ensure the pacification of resistance by making the Empire seem insurmountable.
I know we needed to get our speeder bikes back, but we were pushing our luck way too far on this one.
Actually, I don't think we were, Lerone said.
Trust me,
Brightwater said.
Stormtrooper armor may carry a psychological edge, but even at that, 5 against 300 shouldn't have worked.
Except that it never is only 5 of us, Lerone reminded him. That's the point. The presence of even a single stormtrooper always implies an organization of men and weaponry lurking somewhere in the shadows behind him. They saw 5 of us and assumed there were hundreds more.
Which only works up to the point where someone calls our bluff.
This factor, however, Tarkin attempts to codify into something that can act as a permanent symbol of omnipresence. And this is what people are most familiar with.
Your Majesty, it has long been my contention that the average citizen has no grasp of numbers, nor a head for calculation. I maintain that one of the reasons for the effectiveness of the Star Destroyer is its size. When citizens look at a Star Destroyer and then look at the craft which might be made available to attack it, even the best mind among them wishes to reject the notion rather than approach the problem tactically. I think this effect could be exploited to a far greater degree. The average citizen deals in symbols, not rational analysis. If we present the citizen with a weapon so powerful, so immense as to defy all conceivable attack against it, a weapon invulnerable and invincible in battle, that shall become the symbol for the Empire. We may need only a handful, perhaps only one of these weapons to subjugate thousands of worlds, each containing millions upon millions of beings. This single weapon must have force great enough to dispatch an entire system, and the fear it shall inspire will be great enough for you to rule the galaxy unchallenged. What do you need with the Senatorial Council when you can give direct control of territories to the regional governors? Sweep away the last remnants of the old republic and let fear keep the local systems in line. Fear of our ultimate weapon.
The superweapon. The symbol of Imperial power as much as it is a weapon of destruction. It's meant by its reputation alone to be a permanent deterrence against revolt. Because, as Tarkin notes, normal people deal more with what they can easily comprehend. They wouldn't know the size of their sector fleet, much less what a Star Destroyer alone could do to an unshielded planet unless they watched a history holo. You can't really get more obvious than a moon-sized battle station that can quite literally blow up a planet in seconds.
Wilhuff Tarkin, now Grand Moff Tarkin, with that exalted promotion being due to this very project, stood before the deck-to-ceiling transparent steel viewport on the observation deck, looked out at his creation, and found it good. He was building a world. True, as worlds went, what was taking form 300 kilometers from his flagship would not be quite as imposing as Imperial Center, say, or Alderaan. But when finished, it would be larger than 2 of the satellites of his own planet Eriadu, and it would be home to well over 1 million beings. More to the point, it would hold countless worlds under his thrall. It had been nearly 3 decades since Wraith Sinar had first made Tarkin privy to the concept of the battle station planetoid, and it had taken almost a decade to get the idea through the snarls of red tape and bring the Geonosians on board to improve and implement the designs. The project had been known by various code names, such as the Great Weapon, and the original plans had been much improved by the Geonosian leader Poggle the Lesser. But it had taken years for the concept to be stewarded through the tortuous maze of government bureaucracy before construction was finally ordered to begin. There were still flaws in the original plans, but many of them had been addressed during the building of the proof-of-concept prototype in the Maw installation, and others were being corrected as they were uncovered. The greatest minds in the galaxy had been recruited or drafted to lend their expertise to the building of this ultimate weapon. The brilliant Dr. Oron Keldor, the mad weapons master Umak Leth, the young but nevertheless laser-sharp Amwati prodigy Quicksucks, the Twi'lek administrator Tal Sivron. They, and many others of like stripe, had been investigated and approved by Tarkin himself. All were as good as the Empire could provide, willing or unwilling. In addition, he had conscripted a veritable army of enslaved Wookiees, plus tens of thousands of convicts from the steaming jungles of the prison planet Despair, and a plethora of construction droids, the latter the largest such collection of automata ever assembled. All of them, organic and artificial, now worked around the chrono with but one goal in mind, the culmination of his vision. The project, codenamed Death Star.
And here's the thing people don't like to admit about the Tarkin Doctrine. It works, so long as the superweapon exists to enforce it. We see this is quite true in universe, not only with the superweapons that last longer than their first shot, but even in an alternate timeline where the first Death Star survives and the rebellion is crushed.
As you can see, Lord Vader, our efforts were not in vain. Like a cornered animal, the rebellion panics in its last gasps for survival.
Do not celebrate victory prematurely, Tarkin. Cornered animals are known for their ferocity. We must show them no mercy. Master, the rebellion has been reduced to a mere pocket of resistance. Complete control of the galaxy is at hand.
It is as I have foreseen, my apprentice. Our years of toil are finally coming to an end.
The Empire wins in reality. The reason it doesn't is because the Death Star was destroyed. Alderaan was only able to become a rallying cry for the rebellion because it was still breathing. The rebellion punched well above its weight at Yavin, against a heavyweight who was holding back. The rebels almost lost everything. After the battle, the strike force of Red and Gold squadrons was down to 3 fighters. That's 90% casualties, incurred against only the Death Star's guns and a single squadron of elite pilots. If circumstances hadn't put Luke in that cockpit, the rebellion would be a dust ring around Yavin Prime. By not only surviving, but destroying the Death Star, the rebellion showed the Empire wasn't invincible, and it could be fought against. Destroying the ultimate symbol of Imperial power, the rebellion had rendered its effect null and void. You cannot enforce a doctrine of power if the symbol and force of it no longer exists to project that power.
What of the Death Star, Your Majesty? Use its full destructive power against them.
But had it survived, the Death Star would have been as Tarkin had envisioned it. It is the ultimate symbol of power projection. Beyond its superweapon, it can do things far more tactical than just blowing up a planet. The Death Star, when it targeted Alderaan, bypassed the planet's shields to destroy it. It did in a matter of seconds what takes platforms like torpedo spheres a prolonged siege to do. The Death Star eliminates the ultimate defense against invasion, the planetary shield. The Death Star can systematically eliminate a world's only defenses and leave them open for invasion. Planet destruction is what it can do at its peak, but on the smaller scale it can do anything from one-shot capital ships to eliminating a world's defenses before invading.
The whole idea, as he understood it, was that the threat would be more than enough. They'd probably disintegrate an uninhabited moon or two just to prove they meant business, but the actual targets would be military, rebel bases, fleets, and the like. For such as those, the super laser would be a ridiculous amount of overkill, akin to frying a green flea with a turbo laser.
No fleet can match it, no army can get close enough to take it. It quite literally can do the job Tarkin needs it to, in order to be the ultimate symbol of unassailable Imperial authority.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
But Tarkin wasn't so foolish to only make one. The plan was to mass produce them, making the Death Stars into regional commands. Essentially, an Oversector would have a Death Star, and sectors would have Super Star Destroyers.
Oh yeah, a ship is nothing. The power to the beam was only in the single digits. Cranked up full, anything within 500,000 clicks isn't safe, including asteroids, moons, even planets. No. Yes. Why else would they spend all that time and money on this? He swung one arm to encompass the entirety of their surroundings. If it couldn't produce some major damage, why else would they call it the Death Star? It's hard to imagine, she said. For you. For me, even. Not for the Imperial high-level mucks who get paid to come up with such things. What I heard, this thing's been in development in one form or another for years. And once it starts rampaging through the galaxy, the rebellion's crisp. If Tarkin even thinks there's a rebel base on a planet or a moon... Nova moved both hands in a motion, simulating the flowering of an explosion. Boom. End of base, end of problem. 2 or 3 worlds go up in a flash like that, and the war's over. Who would risk losing billions or even trillions of people to hide a few insurrectionists? It'll be all finished except for the bands and the medals. You think? Roto asked. No question. Maybe when my tour is done, I'll open up a school somewhere quiet. Maybe out in one of the arms. Settle down, even have a few kids. Because war as we know it won't happen with things like this. He patted the bar top gently a couple of times, flying around. Build a few more of them. You won't need armies or navies or planet-bound military bases. You get a hotspot, some systems get cranky, You send a Death Star, and it'll be game over. Mima thought about it. The Sarge was right. Even with just one Death Star operational, the rebellion wouldn't stand a chance. Build a whole fleet of them, and the Empire would have the galaxy gripped in a Durasteel hand forever.
When you live in the Star Wars galaxy, things on this scale are possible with the technology at hand. It only took 20 years to make the first Death Star because it was done in secret, with years of technological development to get things like the super laser to work. It was constructed in such a way that it could use mass-produced components to streamline its production. They had massive fabrication facilities used to pump out the raw material and the labor to build it.
Thus, it had been reasoned early on that, while the hull was being laid, individual sectors would be built and sealed. This allowed plenty of storage space, at least at first, for supplies, as well as habitats for workers to stay close to the task. Hundreds of thousands of laborers needed someplace convenient to live. Shuttling them back and forth for any distance after every shift was neither cost nor time effective. The hull plate extruders were only a few hundred kilometers away, hung at a fixed orbital point where the gravitational forces of the prison planet and the raw material asteroids being towed to the gigantic masticators all balanced. The process was simple enough. An asteroid sufficiently high in nickel-iron content was hauled from the outlying belt to the masticators and fed into a maw. The whirling Durasteel teeth chewed the asteroid to tiny bits and mixed them with alloy ores mined and brought up from Despair, including quadanium. The resulting gravel had water added and was put under high pressure to form a slurry, then fed into pipelines that led to the smelters. These were essentially huge melting pots that refined the mix, burning off impurities. The resulting scarified ore was conveyed to extruders that pressed out the hull plate, rather like food paste from a squeezed tube. There was still a lot of slag left over, but this was just gathered together, pointed at the local star, and given a hard push. Months later, these slag rafts would fall into the sun and be burned up. Tila had been on projects before that used deep space masticators and extruders, of course, such as skyhooks and wheel worlds. She'd never seen as large or as many as there were here, however. The amount of plate being produced was beyond any amount ever used in one place before. Sector N1 was shaped like a large crescent slice of juice melon, cut in half midway. It was 31 kilometers wide at the base, which would be the equator when the station was finished, narrowing almost to a point, only a few dozen meters wide at the other end, and just over 94 clicks long. Most of the sectors would be identical in this hemisphere, save for a select few, and including, of course, those through which the super laser would be constructed. It was hard to visualize the scope of the whole orb. Big didn't begin to do it justice. The habitable crust alone was 2 kilometers thick, and included in it the surface city's sprawls, armory, hangar bays, command center, technical areas, and living quarters. Below that would be the hyperdrive, reactor core, and secondary power sources, none of which fortunately concerned her.
It was designed so after the first model was built, the Death Star's use of standard equipment would allow for ease of mass production. Even the second Death Star, even larger, built more remotely, and on a time crunch, was months away from completion by the time of Endor.
But he asked the impossible. I need more men.
Then perhaps you can tell him when he arrives.
But superweapons weren't a threat only to the enemy. Members of the military and the Imperial industrial complex saw the Death Star as a threat to their own positions. But in the Empire, the word of the Emperor is law.
There had been many commanders in the fleet, he knew, who had seen the Emperor's original Death Star as a blatant attempt to bring the Empire's vast military power more tightly under his direct control, just as he had already done with the Empire's political power. The fact that he'd ignored the battle station's proven vulnerability and gone ahead with a second Death Star had merely reinforced that suspicion. There would have been few in the fleet's upper echelons who would have genuinely mourned its loss if it hadn't, in its death throes, taken the Super Star Destroyer Executor with it.
As a result of this proposal, Tarkin was not only given full authority over the Death Star project, but also made the first of the Grand Moffs in order to fulfill his aims.
To Governor Moff Tarkin, from Imperial Advisor Ars Dangor for the Emperor, regarding the Tarkin Doctrine. You have read correctly, valued servant. Everything you have suggested will be implemented in a policy to be officially known as the Tarkin Doctrine. Rule through fear instead of through idealistic government agencies has a satisfying appeal to the Emperor. As such, the following title is bestowed upon you immediately, along with all relevant powers pertaining to such. You are now Grand Moff Tarkin, the first of a new order of Imperial officials. You have complete authority and control of Oversector Outer, which includes most of the sectors considered the Outer Rim territories. You are to implement under extreme secrecy the design and construction of your ultimate tool of fear, codenamed the Death Star Project. You have command of 4 sector groups to use to maintain the peace and to provide security for the Death Star Project.
As a result of this document, Tarkin was given sweeping powers and authority as a Grand Moff. This new position came with the control of Oversector Outer, encompassing the entire Outer Rim, which would not only see his full authority, but the appointment of thousands more Moffs and Grand Moffs in the years to come.
The Imperial Senate will no longer be of any concern to us. I have just received word that the Emperor has dissolved the Council permanently. The last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away.
That's impossible. How will the Emperor maintain control without the bureaucracy?
The regional governors now have direct control over their territories.
The Death Star was to become the first symbol of the Tarkin Doctrine, though many more would be developed as the ideas took root in the military, influencing everything from vehicle design to military tactics. However, while this worked in his favor, Tarkin himself didn't put much stock in it. In his estimation, things like the AT-AT could do little when compared to the Death Star, in terms of the levels of power projection to secure an entire galaxy.
Tarkin, what do you have to report?
The Death Star is proceeding ahead of schedule, Your Majesty, thanks to the new labor forces from Geonosis and Kashyyyk. We have directed the surplus in supplies to various technological advances.
I am pleased with your progress. I have been informed of Colonel Veers and his new weapon of war. I shall be watching the demonstration remotely. It should prove most interesting. Both you and Lord Vader should view it as well.
I am needed elsewhere, my master.
And with the Death Star soon fully operational, we will have no need for ground assaults in the future.
Both of you will witness this demonstration. I see it as a seminal moment for the Empire.
I still don't believe we'll need such a machine once the Death Star has been unleashed upon the unsuspecting galaxy.
I foresee Veer's new weapon being even more successful than you could imagine, Tarkin.
General Veers, prepare your men.
Admiral.
Tarkin's doctrine would be a tool used by others to climb the ladder. Things that had no relation to it were treated in such a manner to reflect his doctrine. The use of stormtroopers as shock troops, creation and use of intimidating vehicles such as the AT-AT, and combat tactics to intimidate the foe and instill a subconscious as well as overt reaction to the presence of the Imperial military. The latter is something Tarkin contributed to, with lectures at various military academies such as Kurita, further permeating the various levels of command by his direct involvement. As officers climbed the ranks, his ideas would follow right behind them. Everything from armor tactics to fighter doctrine, based around intimidating the opposition into defeat. And this effect would be felt across the galaxy, where you see one TIE fighter, one Star Destroyer, one Stormtrooper. You'll know the Empire is there.
Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station.
The Death Star itself would be his duty to oversee, and his ideas would lay the foundation for how the Empire would operate to the very end.
The Emperor is pleased, Grand Moff Tarkin. Do not disappoint him.
The Tarkin Doctrine didn't fail because it didn't work. Out of every aspect listed within Tarkin's 5 points, the superweapon symbol was the only one to fail. It wasn't that they were incapable of achieving it. Far from it. It's that they were constantly prevented from achieving their goal. They were continually destroyed by the rebels, who knew that if they were successfully fielded, there would be nothing they could do to stop them. The Tarkin Doctrine pushed the rebels to desperation, making them unable to contend with the Empire in a straight-up fight, and had the Death Star or any of the other major superweapons not been destroyed, they would have done exactly as Tarkin intended, as we see with the Galaxy Gun. When it started laying down the law, whole worlds capitulated, throwing themselves upon the Emperor's mercy.
Excellent! Another rebel troopship has returned to the void. The Rebel Alliance will know their day is over. Do you not agree, Zaganist?
My Emperor, your Galaxy Gun is the ultimate terror weapon. It has given you absolute control. It has only been fired 4 times, and yet planets all over the galaxy are capitulating to your rule.
These superweapons weren't unachievable. They were built, worked, and were utterly devastating. Through their power, they always brought their enemies to heel. The word superweapon will be forever infamous with Grand Moff Tarkin. Even in death, Tarkin's ideas would live on. The threat of them being used by warlords continued to deal psychological damage to the galaxy. The final victory of the Tarkin Doctrine, always so close, would never be achieved. But perhaps unbeknownst to him, the Emperor had other plans for all the superweapons his actions helped to create.
A persistent question for New Republic strategists has been the seemingly endless Imperial obsession with superweapons. From super star destroyers to torpedo spheres, it has been nearly impossible to overestimate the amount of destructive force available to the average Moff or sector group commander. The Imperial Starfleet has thousands of capital ships with enough firepower to raise civilizations and sterilize worlds. Even at their mightiest, at the Battle of Endor, the combined fleets of the Rebel Alliance always relied on superior intelligence, guerrilla tactics, and faith in the Force for victory. The military planners of the New Order have an insatiable appetite for newer and deadlier weapons. The most famous of these weapons, and most characteristic of the Imperial mind, have been the Death Stars. Immense, seemingly impregnable, and armed with a numbing amount of destructive power, including the famed superlaser, Death Stars are the ultimate weapon. Still, they have proven surprisingly vulnerable to attack. After the 1 in a trillion shot that blew the first Death Star to atoms in the Yavin system, Imperial propaganda departments went into overdrive. Better to deny the station ever existed than suggest the almighty Empire could suffer such a staggering defeat. The last few reports from Alderaan were too panicked to be reliable, and with the Empire's control of the media, it was quite easy for the Empire to stem the flow of information. It was easy enough for the surviving witnesses, mainly Rebel Alliance members, to be discredited or eliminated. The truly surprising aspect of the matter was the fact that the Empire immediately began work on a second Death Star after the first was destroyed. The Endor system was chosen as a construction site. This time, the Emperor saw to it that word of the project reached his enemies. This new Death Star would serve as bait for a massive trap. Against all odds, this new version of the ultimate weapon in the galaxy was destroyed by Alliance warriors. Logically, that should have destroyed all faith in the Tarkin Doctrine, and yet we can see this is not so. Shortly before the attack on Calamari, the rebellion received reports of fringe worlds in the borderland regions whose surfaces had been burned away by monstrous things the survivors called City Smashers. Of course, we eventually learned the truth of these stories. The horrible world devastators were simply the latest of the Empire's superweapons. By closely examining the Tarkin Doctrine itself, we can find an explanation for the continued development of superweapons. To quote, "It has long been my contention that your new order needs one undeniable and overwhelming symbol to impress and, Yes, frighten the masses. The key word is symbol. We can see from this that the Death Star was never required to function to be effective. That it did was a great bonus, but largely irrelevant. In more ways than one, the original Death Star had already served much of its purpose by the time it was destroyed. It could paralyze whole worlds with fear. Where there was one, why not more? In the imagination of the public, there lurked the fear that some similar weapon remained, or perhaps even a fleet of them hidden in some dark region of space, striking secretly against intransigent worlds. The secrecy that had always surrounded the project, and the vehemence with which the existence of the Death Star was denied by the Empire, gave it the power of a mythic symbol. Damned good propaganda. Yet, there is evidence to suggest that there is more to the Tarkin Doctrine than was first believed. With the revelation of the Emperor's possible immortality, a new theory comes to mind. With seemingly no end to his reign, the Emperor could foresee a time when he would want to expand his reign. Would a single galaxy be enough for Palpatine the Undying? I think not. The Old Republic had long considered the possibility of contact with other galaxies and made several abortive attempts at it. Palpatine had even secretly destroyed the most recent of these, the Outbound Flight Project. According to what we have retrieved from Admiral Thrawn's notes, he led the mission to kill the 6 Jedi aboard the ship. It seems obvious that Palpatine's ultimate goal was the conquest, not just of our galaxy, but of others. What better way to ensure his military supremacy than with these world devastators? Arriving at world after world, consuming and creating weapons while the battle rages on about them, never lacking for resources or energy. The thought is terrifying. We must be thankful that the efforts of our bravest heroes, especially Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa Solo, have ended the Emperor's terror.
Though these two would fail, the most powerful of them would be forever linked with the grand design of Emperor Palpatine. I'd like to thank Poncho for reading that closing quote there. It's very fitting for stuff he has coming up in the near future. Be sure to check him out. He does great work on his channel. I hope you all enjoyed this dive into the Tarkin Doctrine and the man behind it. If you enjoy my content, feel free to like and subscribe to see more stuff in the future. Until next time, Ross out.
Rise, my friend. This day has seen the end of the last Jedi Knight and the Rebellion.
There is nothing to stop us now, my master.
It is all as I have foreseen.